Rise of Kingdoms has completely changed the crystal tech buffs here in kvk. This is going to be live for the pioneer test servers of Heroic Anthem Remaster. So the question is, with the updated crystal tech stats giving you defense and health, combined with the fact that there's no improved morale, there's no all damage at the end here, and they lowered the kvk buff from 40% all damage to 30% all damage, with all these changes that they just dropped all at once, do you have to change your best in slot equipment for your armies now that your stats are going to be completely different? That's the question that we're going to be answering today, because I ran 12 hours worth of battle formula data comparing different sets of gear for over 40,000 battle turns in Rise of Kingdoms using the best known battle formula, and the results might actually surprise you. So stick around, we'll answer the question for infantry, cavalry and archers. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, I took many hours today to perform all these tests, so if you guys appreciate all the time and effort that went into this video, please consider dropping a thumbs up down below and subscribe if you haven't. Now, I'm going to remind you guys to use chapters. There's going to be chapters down below so you can jump to the part of the video that you care the most about, but I want to start here with at least acknowledging what actually changed here in the crystal tech. Now, you may have already seen this change, so we're going to go through it pretty quick. Okay, you start off with 5% attack, you get march speed for your different troop types, call to arms shows up early in the tech tree, and not far beyond that you get call to arms too. So right off the bat you'll be able to get 50% unit capacity, which is kind of crazy. Now, one of the things we don't know about this tech tree, okay, how much do you have to upgrade a particular piece of tech before you can move on to the next one, right? Do you have to get quench blades to 5 before you can move on to swift marching 1, and then do you have to get this to 5 before you can get this, or do you only have to do 1 point here, 1 point here, and then boom, you can get 10 points in call to arms? I'm sure there will be some milestones that you have to reach at some point, but we don't know those at the time of recording this, so just keep that in mind. So after call to arms 2, we move on here, and then we get even more attack. This is 7.5% for each of the troop types, and then we get up to 15% defense for each of the troop types, followed by 10% march speed. Runecraft lets you summon a rune of your choice. Emergency support gives you 30% hospital capacity. Rapid retreat is going to let you use gems to instantly recall to your city. This is for whales, don't waste your gems here. Then you get 15% troop health for each individual troop type, followed by 15% march speed for each of those troop types. Then you get healing cost reduction for tier 5 units. Celestial guidance gives you up to 3000% auto help, which I suspect is just as soon as you press help you get 30 helps. That's crazy. That's wild that they did that. Why don't they just remove the help limit? Like, I don't know, this seems crazy to me. Like, isn't that just easier? I don't know. And then down here we have damage taken reduction from individual troop types. Now I just want to go on record and say that I was actually right. I predicted all of this in my previous video where we talked about this. Now I know it doesn't take a 900 IQ to figure it out, but I did say that it looked like we'd be getting defense, health, and I even predicted that this could be damage taken reduction from each troop type. So I've honestly been on a roll since the beginning of this year. I've kind of predicted a lot of different things. Maybe I'll make an entire video just going over all the things I tried to warn you guys about. But anyway, that's what the new tech tree looks like. What did the old tech tree look like? Well, it had a lot of the same bones here, but the main difference is that the new tech tree has 15% defense, 15% health, and it loses 30% attack. So previously you were able to get up to 42% attack across all your different troop types. Some of the attack was on universal tech, some of it was on troop specific tech, but now you can see that you only get 5% attack here, 7.5% attack here, so you get 12.5% attack, 15% defense, 15% health. Okay, so they just took that 30% attack, broke it into, gave you defense, gave you health, and then they removed improved morale, so no more all damage, and they replaced that with damage taken reduction from troop types. Now, just to refresh you guys on the battle formula for Rise of Kingdoms, we have sort of a rough draft. This is an earlier form of the battle formula. The creator of the rock battle simulator, Specco, actually has refined this formula a little bit to make it a little bit more accurate with what is in game. But the most important part here, you can kind of ignore everything after the two just for the point of this. Okay, what's important is the relationship between your attack, defense, and health here. And the easiest way to understand this formula is that for your specific army, what you would like to have happen is that you would like your defense and health, I mean, you want all your stats as high as possible, right? Obviously that's a no-brainer, but because you can't have everything as high as possible, there's a give and take. You know, one piece of gear gives some amount of stats, and if you switch it to something else, it might go from attack to defense or from defense to health. And so the idea is that you kind of want a 1-to-1 ratio of your defense to health, and you want to stack as much attack on top of that as you possibly can. And so figuring out the perfect perfect optimization of those three things is the name of the game here. And so that's why it's important to understand that when the developers change the number of stats that you get from Crystal Tech, it could possibly change the outcome of your performance with the gear that you've already crafted and with the commanders that you are already using. Now, the reason that people always say that health is the best stat is because it's always going to be your lowest stat. If you come in here, you'll see your military buffs in your city. You get 98% attack. Here I have a little bit extra defense, but only 56% infantry health. If we come down to cav attack, we have 103, cav defense, we have 103, but cav health 56. Same thing with archers, 56. Okay, why is that? It's because your alliance technology does not give you any health. Okay, you get attack and you get defense, but you do not get health from your alliance, and you get some amount of health from your military tech here, but it's not as much as the actual attack and defense that you get. So okay, so we know that because you want a ratio of defense and health, and because health is always lower, then in instances where you can choose to get health over something else, it's almost always going to be in your best interest, unless you're running some crazy combination like a Constantine Zenobia garrison or something like that, where you're like stacking a ton of health, or maybe Constantine with like CPO Prime, right? And that's only because he gives you so much health. But my point is, most of the time you're gonna have less health than anything else, unless it's some fringe weird one-off chance. Okay, and I'm here to report that with the changes to the Crystal Tech system, this doesn't really move the needle when it comes to health. Health is still by and large going to be the best stat in the game. Now again, there's going to be some instances where that might not be the case. I didn't run tests for something like Zhuge Liang with Philip or Shajar primary, Zhuge Liang secondary. Those two pairs have a ton of health. Okay, so it might be the case that it influences that a little bit, but for most armies, adding 15% extra health on top of the gear that you've already been using, it's still going to be your lowest stat, and so therefore nothing really changes there. But the interesting thing is, now we actually get more defense than we do attack. You get 15% defense and 12.5% attack. So okay, that's interesting. So it might be the case that some of our gear has too much defense now because we actually would rather have more attack. And the first thing that came to mind for me as an infantry main is the fact that like all of infantry's pieces of gear have defense. Now it's worth noting that over the past, I would say, year and a half or so, ever since the leadership set came into the game, people did realize that it is better in fact to switch out the Eternal Knights for the leadership legs, and most people are using the set piece boots. You can swap those for the leadership boots, both legs and boots with a infantry talent, and then you can use the gold key gloves, which is the sacred grips, and that would be technically your best in slot with the 2 kvk pieces and hope cloak. Okay, so most people prior to this kvk Crystal Tech change already knew that things like the Eternal Knight would be better off on the bench, since you now had the leadership legs option, which gives you health. If you guys didn't know, got it right here. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's jump into some of the results here that we got from the Rock Battle Simulator, and as always, I will link it down below. I'm not affiliated with the project at all, but it is the best way to test the best known battle formulas for Rise of Kingdoms in a vacuum, which is especially helpful when you're looking at just tweaking one little variable like we're doing here. So we're going to start with infantry, and I do want to set the stage for how I actually ran these tests. That way you can go ahead and do it yourself. Now, instead of a 40% bonus to all damage like we normally get from kvk, I set it to 30% all damage. I used a total of 375,000 troops, which typically you'll probably have a little bit more with a 50% troop capacity expansion, but some people will have less, so I thought that was a fair middle ground. I ran 15-minute tests up against a test dummy because what we're really trying to test is your army. You have no control over who you are hitting. Well, I guess you kind of do, but that nobody plays that way. That's completely suboptimal, and you'll drive yourself crazy just hunting down specific commanders. Okay, what you mainly have control over is your own army, your own gear. The enemy here, we're using a test dummy because we need to keep it consistent, and if we picked, for example, a cav army, well then I can't compare my cav results to my archer results because the archer results are weak to cavs. You see how that works? You guys understand? You know this, right? You've played World of Warcraft with test dummies. You know the point of test dummies. Okay, for infantry I assumed a 10% defense city skin from the kvk shop. For everyone else I gave the Twilight Falls. I also assumed infantry was France, everything else was Ottoman, and for each of these armies I gave them the top 2 special inscriptions, so the easiest 2 special inscriptions to get, the one from the KVK shop and the guaranteed one that you can get from recycling. As you can see here, we're testing Bai Chi with Liu Che. I think that's a fair army to use because I think a lot of people are going to be using that army, but I will say once again, these results will change if you change your army to something like Ragnar Scipio, for example, because Ragnar Scipio has 40% defense from Ragnar and you have more health, right, from Scipio. So again, if you want individual results for each individual army, you'll have to go through the rock battle simulator yourself, but I feel like Bai Chi Liu Che is a fair army to test with because I think a lot of people are going to use it. So the first set we tested was the 2 KVK pieces, the Hope Cloak with the Eternal Legs, and we used the boots and gloves from the infantry set with a 10% health rune. I also tested the 10% attack item. That's this one right here in the VIP shop. Okay. And I also tested the 10% defense item, which you can see in the shop, because that will make a difference. And you'll see that in these test results. Here we have the Sev wounds that I dealt and the Sev wounds that I took. Obviously I'm dealing way more Sev wounds than taking because we're going up against a practice dummy. And of course I gave ourselves 12.5% attack for the new crystal tech, 15% defense, 15% health. What we have here is the ratio, and this is what I'm using to judge what the best sets are, and we have the average ratio because I ran each thing twice. Now again, each one of these tests is 15 minutes, so that's 900 battle turns. Okay, 900 turns of battle smashing up against this target, and you will see the ratio of Sev wounds dealt to taken on average for this set was 39.19, and if you swap the attack item for a defense item, it goes down to 38.9. so here you could see the attack item was better for infantry, and if we move down to the infantry's old best in slot, and by old I just mean before they changed the crystal tech yesterday, so that's the leadership legs and boots, the gold key gloves and chest, so the Hope Cloak and the sacred grips, and then the 2 KVK pieces, of course. And here you can see that with the defense item it actually performed better, and this is the best that we've got so far, actually a 40.65 trade ratio, which is quite nice. Moving on, we have the 2 KVK pieces, the leadership legs and boots, and the set piece chest and gloves. I wanted to test the set chest piece because now attack might be more valuable, and as you can see here, we got a pretty good result with the defense item equipped. We have 40.17 as our trade ratio compared to with the attack item it was 39.66. Next I tested the 2 KVK pieces with the leadership boots, the gold key chest, that's the Hope Cloak, and the set gloves and legs. Yes, the set legs, and you'll see with the defense item it outperformed here, the 40.22 trade ratio, very close call by the way, 40.2 trade ratio for the attack item, so very close here. Here we have the old 4-piece set. Okay, so that is the set weapon, set helmet, set boots, and set gloves, and then the Hope Cloak and the Eternal Knight. This is what I typically refer to as the sort of March speed set because you get the 4-piece set bonus, and of course because you have less total stats it is going to perform a little bit worse. 38.91 was the better performing of the two with the attack item equipped. Then we had the 4-piece set with the leadership legs, so literally just remove the Eternal Knight legs for the leadership legs. Special talent here, everything has a special talent here by the way, and you can see it actually performed a little bit worse than the Eternal Knight, so okay, that's unfortunate. And then the final infantry set that I tested was the set weapon, helmet, chest, and gloves. That's right, the set chest piece, which is all infantry attack, and then I paired it with the leadership legs and boots, which is all health. And as you'll see here, 38.84 trade ratio for the attack item was a little bit better than the 38.5 for the defense item. So what can we learn for infantry? Well, as you can see here, and as I've highlighted it with the different colors, the best performing sets, and really the single best performing set, was the one that we were already using, which was the leadership legs and boots, the gold key gloves, so the sacred grips, and the Hope Cloak with the 2 KVK pieces. Coming in a close sort of close second place was the 2 KVK pieces with leadership boots, the gold key chest piece, and the set gloves and set legs. These were very neck and neck here, but the defense item did overpower. And then in 4th place we had the 2 KVK pieces, leadership legs and boots, with the set chest and gloves with the defense item. So what do we learn here? Well, first of all, apparently it is still best to use what we've already been using for infantry very slightly if you're using a 10% defense item and have a 10% health rune for Bai Chi and Liu Che. All of those things are important. All of that data is important, right? If you change the army, that's going to change the data. If you change your rune, it's going to change the data. If you change your attack buff, a defense buff, whatever, that's going to change the data as well. But for Bai Chi, Liu Che, you don't have to change anything from what you were probably already doing before. And you'll notice that the set that did the best here was actually the one that had the closest ratio between attack and defense with the highest amount of health that we could possibly get, right? And that's kind of what I noticed here. If you did use the attack item, you have less defense, more attack, obviously, and that separates the difference here. Now the ratio here doesn't typically matter, right, because the attack is in the numerator, but it is at least interesting to know that, you know, the diminishing returns will start to kick in once you get more and more defense over attack, right? That's kind of the issue that we have here with this set right here, is that you'll notice the defense is higher than the attack in both of these, and it thus underperforms. That's my theory so far. For Cavalry, we only tested 3 different sets because Cavalry aren't really affected by this change that much, and that's because Cavalry are blessed with really good gear. They just have so many health pieces, and as I said earlier in the video, you're still probably going to have less health than anything else anyway, and so they still come out ahead, which is quite nice. Now I did obviously Huo with Arthur, which I would argue is the single best cavalry march in the game right now, although that will change probably sometime later in the year or whenever the next Cav set comes out. I anticipate combo to take over, but for now that's our single best army. We did the current best in slot gear, which is the 2 kvk pieces, the crystal key gloves and legs, and then the 2-piece set with the chest and the boots. I know you can't see it, it's cut off down there. That's what was already best in slot here, and you'll see that if we use a 10% attack item, then we get a 39.53 trade ratio. If we use a defense item, it's 39.36, so slightly worse. If we swap out the 2 crystal key pieces, so that is the legs and the gloves, both of which give health, if we swap it out for a 4-piece set, you actually get attack on the legs and defense on the gloves. And if you do that, you actually get a worse trade with the attack item, as you might expect, because your attack is already higher from the equipment, and you actually get the same exact ratio with the 10% defense item. Now I know it's a little cut off here, so let me scroll down slightly. If I had enough time, I could run both these tests more and more, and we could really split hairs and figure out which one's actually better. But the good news is that you probably already have this one crafted, so if they are equal, then just keep using the one you already have. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then the final set that I tested here for calves is just one that I've never heard anyone doing, but I figured I would test it now that Crystal Tech has changed, and that is the 2 kvk pieces, the set piece chest, boots and legs with the crystal key health gloves. So that's Navarre's control, and this was the worst performing one with the attack item, and even with the defense item it performed pretty bad. So okay, great news, at least for Huo Arthur. Okay, at least for Huo Arthur, if you're using a 10% attack item, then nothing actually changes, and realistically a 10% defense item is still not that far away. It's still pretty much the same. I'm just gonna expand that, it's just easy. Why do I make it hard on myself? I'll just make it bigger. Okay, here we have archers, and I only tested 2 sets. All right, we have the 2 kvk pieces and a 4-piece archer set, and we have the 2 kvk pieces, 2-piece set and 2 leadership pieces, and this is where things change a little bit. Okay, this is where things change a little bit, and in this case it seems to be the case that the 2 kvk pieces and 4-piece archer set with a 10% defense item is the highest performing trade ratio here with a 41.95, very close second place with the attack item, and the 2-2-2 set for Zhuge Liang with Herman gets you a 41.79 with the attack item, 41.61 for the defense item. So very close data here, but this is actually different than what some people are using. I know a lot of people are using the 2-2-2 lineup. This does show that with a defense item it would be slightly better to do a 2 kvk pieces with a 4-piece archer set, so that is the archer boots and yes, the archer legs, which are actually attack pieces. You have attack stats on your legs and attack stat on your gloves, right? So it'd be defense, attack, health, attack and defense, right? And I think the reason that archers are actually a little bit different than the rest of the crowd from the very rough draft preliminary results that we have here is because archers are the only ones that have defense on their weapon, right? Whether you use the set piece weapon or the kvk weapon, it's always going going to be defense, and as you guys know, your weapon gives you the most amount of stats, right? And so in this scenario where we have the amount of attack that you got overall, it used to be 42, now it's 12 and a half. It's gone down dramatically, and even still, some of the other commander pairings that we've been testing here still have tons of attack, and it's mostly because the commanders themselves, and also because they get just a ton of stats from a crit special talent on their KVK weapon. It's like 32 something percent, which is wild. So what did we actually learn here? Well, we learned that there might be a micro optimization to be made with archers, but really it's hard to say, right? It's going to be army dependent. Okay, the other thing that we can learn is that I actually think the outcome of this change is that the gap between the different sets is actually a little bit smaller now. So for example, if we looked at like the infantry set, if you at some point crafted the infantry set piece for the chest or the legs, well, now you're not as punished for getting those attack stats because you have less of it than you would have before with max KVK tech. And in a world where it still is 50% material loss to dismantle a legendary item, it's nice to know that the gap between different sets is a little bit smaller. Another thing to know is that because your attack stat is still pretty high, and now that you're getting more defense, right, and arguably defense is kind of the new attack stat in a way, because for many armies you'll have more defense than attack depending. In that way, I think the 7/7 rune is a little bit less valuable than before. So if you guys don't know, one of the legendary golden runes that would drop at like any holy site would be a 7% attack, 7% defense rune, and historically that's, I mean, it's still a great rune, obviously, right? Obviously, but now that there's not only diminishing returns for the attack, but also diminishing returns for the defense on that rune as well, I think it even more so pushes you in the direction towards the 10% health rune over the 7/7 rune. And finally, for most of the tests, the 10% defense item was the best, but in the example where we looked at the cavalry, the attack stat was actually better, right? And I think you could easily make the argument that if you are a giga whale and you're either fighting to sad face or you're extremely picky and you're like sniping kills and always looking for the best possible risk reward ratio for your kills, which is what most people try to do but isn't always possible. For example, in Kingsland you can't be really sniping kills, you kind of just are going all in, right? It depends on your play style, but all in all, I think there is something to be said about the 10% attack item now for certain commanders, right? And especially, like I said earlier, if you're running something like Ragnar with CPO, I could easily see you running the 10% attack item for that march rather than the 10% defense item. And obviously you use an item for your entire account, right? It's not that you just give the item to one army and then a 10% defense item to the other army. It's a flat buff for your entire account. And so what would be wise to do is look at all of your armies and look, okay, well, with this new update, do I want a little bit more defense or a little bit more attack? And I think you might be surprised that, you know, again, we already know the Huo Arthur might prefer the attack. I think it's safe to assume, and I didn't run the test, but it's safe to assume that the Ragnar CPO might prefer the attack, although there is some nice attack on CPO as well. So again, I'll have to test it. But if that's true, and if your archers don't really mind the attack, I mean, it's pretty close, right? The only one that might suffer is actually the Baichi Liu Jie, but even still, I think the key takeaway here is that really at the end of the day, 15% health and 15% defense in the grand scheme of things, like, it's a decent amount of stats, but it's not 42% attack like we used to have, right? Like that 42% attack really, because you could so reliably get that attack stat, it really was, there was diminishing returns there when it came to building your equipment sets. But now that all of the stats are pretty much in line, I don't think any one stat has enough additional bonus here from the crystal tech to really move the needle when it comes to like changing your equipments here, right? Again, a 15% defense from your crystal tech, well, you can get 10% from an item, right? And so it's actually easier if you need to change your stats. If you've always grabbed a 7/7 rune and the 10% attack token, well, maybe just grabbing a 10% health rune and the defense token, that actually might be better for you now. And then you don't have to change any of your equipment. You could just change the other sources of your stats rather than your actual gear itself, because the crystal tech alone isn't that much stats that you can't compensate it in other places a little bit more easily. Now the last question I want to answer here is this change more or less free to play friendly? And I don't know if we can really answer that question yet, and that's because again we don't know how much of each of these things you have to invest in before you can move on to the next one. One thing is for sure, the fact that you can specifically grab stats for troop types that you care the most about is definitely more friendly, of course, and it may be the case in fact moving forward into the Rise of Kingdoms meta that, you know, you pick just 2 troop types to work on as a free-to-play player, and maybe you run 2 infantry, 2 cavalry, and that's it. No archers, no range. Or maybe you run 2 infantry, 2 ranged, or you run 2 cavalry, 2 archer, or something like that, and that might make it way cheaper for you to max out the tech for just those troop types. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see how much this actually costs and how feasible it would be to get a lot of these stats for 3 different troop types for free-to-play players. Now the other thing that I will mention here, and if the devs are open to feedback, I would say at the very least what you could do, if you, one easily thing that I could imagine would help free-to-play players and low spenders a lot, would be to actually take the health here and swap it out with the defense right here, right? So the way that it would work is there would be attack, march speed, troop capacity, attack, health, right? This would be health, and then it would be march speed, larger camps, special concoctions, defense, right? Defense would be near the end of the tree, because again health is more premium than defense, and so making that accessible to everybody earlier on would be better for everybody, including free-to-play players and low spenders, right? That's how I'm thinking about it, but you guys can let me know what you think in the comment section below about that change. As far as the other changes go here, I think hospital capacity is great. I think the extra helps is great, although it seems like a roundabout way to implement that when they could just remove the help limit. I think the summoning of runes is cool. The rapid retreat, I don't know how this is going to impact the game. Certainly it will impact scenarios where you are infiltrating a zone. So for example, like I'm thinking during pass 7, right, where you have a zone that you've locked down and then you're connected to another zone that your enemy has locked down. If you take the pass, you might not want to random teleport into territory that is completely filled with enemy cities, because then you're going to get swarmed down, right? But you might want to try to do a cheeky fort drop pretty far into the zone, and it might take you 15 minutes to walk there, 20 minutes to walk there, and if you die, it's going to make a big deal if you can instantly retreat home. Now that's a very nuanced example, right? So there might not be that many instances where rapid retreat makes a huge difference. Like for example, altars, like as soon as your army dies you can send in a new one anyway, right? So it's not going to affect altars, as I mean, unless I'm missing something, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're on the front line as a whale, then most of the time your marches aren't going to take that long to get back to your city. Although there have been Kingslands where like we are supporting in all 4 corners of the freaking Kingsland, and so we are running all over the place. So in those scenarios it will make a big difference for the whales. So I don't know, I'm on the fence about this. I think there's definitely going to be some niche uses for this where it's going to be a game changer for those that have the gems to spend on it, but I think that those instances are much less rare than we think. I think that this tech tree change will greatly depend on how much you have to invest to move on to the next thing, and how far free-to-play and low spenders can get before they can get a meaningful amount of the health back here, and if they can grab the infantry damage taken reduction and things like that. This is also really interesting. Like you can specifically counter siege now, right? Like you can specifically say like, okay, the enemy is just stacking their ranged units, give me 10% siege damage protection, right? Give it to me right now. That could be a thing. All in all, I don't think that this tech change really moves the needle as much as people might think it will. You know, even though the data that we looked at here is really just evaluating the impact on the battle formula for 3 specific marches, right? And as we actually get our hands on this and play in game, it might turn out to be the case that there's a micro optimization here or there with your equipment. That's totally could be the case. I'm not saying that my data here is end all be all. Of course it's not, right? Of course, as the community experiments more and we test out different pieces of equipment, which is not easy to do because of the 50% penalty that you take with dismantling, but as the community does test with more and more equipment, it may turn out to be the case that with the new tech there's a micro optimization to be made, and if that's the case, of course I will update my equipment guides in the future. All in all, now that we've run the numbers and it doesn't look like we really have to change our gear at all, I do feel like this is probably more free to play friendly. The best thing would be, again, if they move that health up here to where the defense is, if they just swap those positions, I think it would be perfect. But again, you know, if if this was 30% health, 30% defense, I would say it's over for free to play. GG, the enemies are going to be so tanky, you're dead, it's over. But because it's a small amount of stats, and because the whales lost improved morale, right, and because we actually have more tanky stats now, I think that armies in general are going to pop a bit slower, right? I think that was the biggest complaint about the more recent metas, is that armies died instantly, and that's why people ran commanders like Philip and commanders like Alexander the Great, because they had the instant proc, so you didn't have to stick to something to get a meaningful amount of damage off. Now with this change, things are a little tankier, especially if you can get your hands on this the end of this tree here. I don't know if free to play will be able to get here or not, or if it's even going to make a difference, because you'll get like what, 2 upgrades or 4 upgrades, right? 2% is not that much, but the point is that because everything will be a little bit tankier, right, you'll be able to actually run away hypothetically in unfavorable scenarios, right? Like you might have an extra 1 or 2 seconds to react and not get completely melted, because the enemies and the whales that are hitting you don't have 42% attack with 10% improved morale, all damage, and the extra 10% that they lost from the KVK buff, right? Remember, that goes from 40 to 30%. So all in all, if everybody's a little bit more tanky and things pop a little bit slower, and free to play are able to make meaningful progress in this tree, and we don't have to really change our gear, at least from my initial impressions, it doesn't seem like we have to make any major game-changing, you know, dismantles to our legendary stuff. I think this could be good for free to play players. I'm cautiously optimistic. I could be completely wrong, we'll have to wait and see, but it could be good, and so I'm at least happy about that. But again, if the devs are listening, strongly consider swapping the defense and health. I think that would be better for everybody, right? Now the last thing I want to cover here is actually the cost for the new crystal tech. The developers did just release this as I was editing this video. This is over on the official Rise of Kingdoms YouTube channel if you want to go through and take a look for yourself, but I skimmed through it pretty quickly, and it seems like the attack is a bit cheaper than it was before. Of course, there's fewer levels of it. The march speed is a little bit more expensive, unfortunately, even if you completely exclude ranged units or the siege units. It's still about 900,000 crystals compared to previously it was, I think, 800,000 for the first level of march speed, so that is a little bit unfortunate. Moving forward, you could see call to arms is a lot cheaper from what I can tell. I don't have the old numbers memorized though, so please don't quote me on that one, but also the fact that it's so much earlier in the tree with fewer prerequisites makes that very, very attractive, which we love to see. Here we have call to arms 2. Again, I don't remember the exact cost of the original call to arms, so I do apologize for that. Taking a look at the second tier of attack as well as some of the defense options here. Now it's not showing the defense for calves or siege, it looks like, but it's pretty clear that they're going to cost the same because these two cost the same, of course. And it's nice to know that it's not going to go upwards into the millions here, which is good, but again, you're going to have to do this for each of the troop types, and so it will end up costing quite a bit. They also revealed that instant retreat here costs 200 gems per march, so that's, I don't know what I expected the gems to be here. I guess 200 gems per march is reasonable. Here you can see the choice of rune here, and this is definitely a big deal because they are all legendary runes, so you guaranteed can get the stat that you want. You can get the 7/7 rune, or you can get the health rune. I would argue, like I said earlier in the video, that the 10% health rune is probably going to be your best bet moving forward now that they've changed crystal tech. But it's also nice to see that you get training speed, healing speed is a big deal, and the march speed one as well, and that's going to cost 3 million crystals to unlock, which is crazy. Here we see the cost of emergency support, special concoctions starting to get kind of expensive here. Here's the cost for the health, which is obviously a bit more expensive than the previous stats on the list, which is again unfortunate considering that this is the most valuable of them all, further supporting my point that health is still the best stat in the game, because if you're going to be lacking any of them in crystal tech as a free-to-play or low spender, it's going to be this. So even if you're only able to get this halfway through each of these, you're just going to have less health overall, and it's later in the tree. Here's the march speed near the end of the tree. Again, I don't love that this is broken down between troop types, although at least it's worth knowing that if I want, I can slow my calves down to the same march speed as the rest of my armies. That way they're not out of place, out of line, and by slow them down I mean just only upgrading the march speed for infantry and archers. Here's the special concoctions cost, the celestial guidance, so that's the instant helps, I suspect, 6 million for the 7th army here. And it's worth noting that the reduced damage taken from specific troops, it looks like at the higher end is actually lower than the cost of the health. I didn't do the math for the total here, but I suspect, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of prerequisites that you're going to have to unlock before you can even get these, and that is unfortunately not revealed in this video, which I would have loved to see. I would have loved to see them actually just go through and upgrade them so we know what the prerequisites are, but I wanted to at least show you guys the crystals here in case you guys missed this. Again, overall, I didn't do the math because this literally just dropped, but it seems like if you're running obviously only 1 or 2 troop types, you're going to probably save crystals here, and that's especially true if you're only going to be upgrading the march speed for 1 or 2 troop types and maybe going a little bit less in on like halves, for example, and none for the engineering or siege. But if you are running 3 troop types and you're looking to upgrade all the stats for those 3 troop types, it still looks like it will be quite expensive, but I'm sure others will do the actual math over the coming days as more and more people see the new cost and can compare it to the old one. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think that this is going to change things like dramatically or not? While you're down there, consider dropping a thumbs up on the video. It really helps out the channel a ton, and I don't just say that. YouTube really favors engagement, so drop a thumbs up if you can, and subscribe while you're down there if you're new around here, and click that bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.